All right, I was going to look back at 2 Cor 4:18 relative to the importance Paul has been stressing in these verses as of late about the eternal as opposed to the temporal. And Paul mentions in 2 Cor 4:18, while we look not at the things which are seen, the temporal, but at the things which are not seen, the eternal. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. Direct and to the point. In any case, 2 Cor 4:18. Now we're going to look at 1 Corinthians 32 to 35. Let's take a look at C. 1 Corinthians 7:32 to 35. Pretty much wrapping up this chapter 7. All right, let's go the other direction. There you go. Expositors on these verses. But what I want you to be free from concern, one who is unmarried is concerned about the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But one who is married is concerned about the things of the world, the temple, about how he may please his wife. And this I say for your own profit, not that I may put a leash on you, but for what is proper, that you may serve the Lord without distraction. Very hard if you're devoted to the temporal life. And there are things that we have to perfect as best we can to serve the Lord best for eternity. You have to be healthy, rested, and exercised, and focused on God's Word so that you can do that with a mind as clear as it can be, and continual more and more time spent studying the Word of God. As you can do that, especially as you get older, your concentration maybe not be as good as when it was younger. So 32 to 35, the expositor goes on to say, Paul goes on to argue that if they want marriage, they must realize that it brings extra cares, and he wants them to be free from concern. They must observe that married persons, whether men or women, may have their attention centered on the desires and needs of their spouses. In saying that, the unmarried woman or virgin is concerned with how she may please the Lord. Paul implies that the married person is apt to neglect this Christian duty or have the divided interest in, because the married person has a responsibility to his spouse. Since the apostle upholds the right and privilege of marriage even for himself, he must here be advising against marriage because of particular abuses and tensions in Corinth, we surmise. He gives the advice, he says, for their own profit or benefit, and not to restrain them or put them in a noose. Rather, he wants them to live properly in complete and undivided devotion to the Lord. Now let's see what Bible Knowledge Commentary has to say on this. I love to compare these two. They're usually very good with one another. Paul's third reason for remaining single was the development of the second. The single state has potentially fewer encumbrances and distractions than the married state, goes without saying. So it more easily facilitates a spirit of undivided devotion to the Lord. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus warned his followers against letting concern for the material aspects of this life distract them from devotion to God. The poor widow gave all her material sustenance to God as an act of singular devotion. A married man or woman with the needful concern for the well-being of his family, and it should be, would have been less likely to do that. The situation illustrates Paul's point that the single life, with its greater simplicity and obligations, allows a potentially greater commitment of time, resources, and self to the Lord than would be possible for a married person dutifully carrying out the marital and familial obligations attached to that state. Moving on, 36 to 40. 36. But if any man thinks he is behaving improperly toward his virgin, his daughter, if she is past the flower of youth, marriageable age, and thus it must be, let him do what he wishes. He does not sin, let them marry. Nevertheless, he who stands steadfast in his heart, having no necessity, but has power over his own will, and has so determined in his heart that he will keep his virgin, does well. So then, he who marries his virgin does well, but he who does not marry will do better. Okay, the story about marriageable people. A wife is bound as long as her husband lives, but if her husband is dead, she is free to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord, though. But in my opinion, she's happy if she remains as she is. I think that I also have the Spirit of God. Author Paul returns to the subject of remaining single with a male believer who is a virgin and a woman who is a virgin. That's singular. With a male believer who is virgin and a woman who is virgin, especially in view when he wrote in 1 Corinthians 7:36 as follows. But if any man thinks he is behaving improperly toward his virgin, he is in the sense of being betrothed to a woman who is a virgin. Okay, now I got it. With the presumption that he too is a virgin because he is betrothed to her, and he should be. If she is past the flower of youth, and thus it must be, like him, let him do what he wishes. He does not sin, let him marry. With the implication that he is not faulted for choosing to marry his betrothed, both of whom are virgins, as is proper for believers. Notice the word rendered them conveys the context of a man and a woman who are betrothed to be married, and not a father who gives away his daughter to be married as some contend. Okay, I got you. Yeah, it comes out better that way. Two betrothed to one another that are virgins, man and woman. Manuscript evidence. Yeah, a little bit there. We're favoring the one giving her in marriage, or the WHTU is supported the best manuscript evidence. A fiancé marries his virgin fiancé. That's the context that's most likely. Okay, moving on. Paul goes on in 1 Corinthians 7:37 and 38 to clarify this matter that he touched upon in 7:36 as follows. Nevertheless, he who stands steadfast in his heart, having no necessity, but has power over his own will, and has so determined in his heart that he will keep his virgin, keep her in the sense of marry her, does well, indicating that it is permissible for one to marry or not, a personal choice. So, in 1 Corinthians 7:38, which says, so then he who marries his virgin does well, there you go, but he who does not marry will do better in terms of serving the Lord. So, Paul concludes that the one who marries his betrothed, who is a virgin as well, does well. But should he not marry, he will do even better, in the sense of serving the Lord that much the more, due to having greater opportunity and circumstances to do so, provided he follows through in faithfulness to those opportunities and circumstances that the Lord provides for him. That goes without saying, right? Now, some minor circumstances and manuscript evidence here. You can read these. Somebody decides to want to make it more clearly, but the implication is there in both cases in the manuscript evidence. And in 740, most manuscripts read, and I think I have the Spirit of God, Spirit of Christ, nominal differences. Such a good Bible we have. These arguments, based on internal evidence, cannot outweigh the fact that all our manuscripts read the Spirit of God. Okay. So, we're still looking at the manuscript evidence here. So, going on to 739, a wife is bound as long as her husband lives, but if her husband is dead, she is free to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. But in my opinion, she is happier if she remains as she is, and I think that I also have the Spirit of God. So Paul has the idea of serving the Lord. Jesus selected him and gave him this wonderful opportunity, actually appointed him almost forcefully, especially the way Jesus upheld him, stopped him on the road. So in 1 Corinthians 7:39 above, Paul indicates that a wife is bound to stay married as long as her husband lives. Believers are in view, of course, but if her husband is dead, she is free to be married to whom she wishes, but only in the Lord, in the sense that she must not marry an unbeliever, like I did, or a believer who might not be unequally yoked, with her in the Lord. I set back my Christian life that way. And then in 1 Corinthians 7:40 above, Paul presents his opinion on this matter, that a woman who's a believer, is happier if she remains as she is, in the sense of happier serving the Lord if, after her husband dies, she remains single, rather than to remarry, even to not marry at all. Hence, she can serve the Lord all the better and happier. Whereupon Paul writes, and I think that I also have the Spirit of God, which he wrote to affirm his authority, i.e. that his words in this letter are not only of value because of who he is, an apostle, and appointed by the Lord for special circumstances here to serve the Gentiles, but also because they have been inspired by the Spirit of God. Paul, of course, is led by the Spirit of God. This last phrase evidently indicates that there was some question as to his authority as representing God from some within the congregation of believers at Corinth. Nevertheless, his words apply to believers throughout the age and beyond, not only just to the congregation at Corinth. So, Expositor has to say on these verses, 36 to 40. Paul teaches that a virgin of marriageable age must be treated honorably, whether she becomes married or not. It may be right for her to either marry or remain single, that's her personal volition, but who is meant by he is in the verse 36. This is the manuscript discrepancy, no big deal. The father of the virgin or the man who is engaged to her. Some have even interpreted the second view to mean that the virgin was the spiritual bride who lived with a man as a virgin. This latter view presents problems in the light of the scriptures that teach that a man is to cleave to his wife, and they are to be one flesh, and to be fruitful and be fruitful. The decision and multiply. The decision as to whether the he is the father or fiancé turns on the meaning of gamizo, marry. Frequently, verbs ending in ezio are causative. If this is so here, then the translation, he who causes or gives his virgin to be married, would mean that he indicates that the father, who in ancient times arranged for his daughter's marriage. But another viable view is that gamizo is not causative here at all, but is equivalent to gamio, to marry. If so, then he refers to the man who is considering the possibility of marrying his fiancée. Nowadays, your fiancée, that's why he became a fiancé. These are ancient customs here. Two arguments speak in favor of the second interpretation. First, 38b has no object expressed for the verb gamizo, and so the verb can be translated marry, not cause to marry. Second, gamio, marry, is used in the plural. They should get married, plural meaning a man and a woman intending to be married, where one might expect the singular form of gamizo if Paul meant to say, let him give her in marriage. So the teaching is that if the situation in Corinth that Paul is addressing specifically seems to be unfair to a particular virgin, and especially if it's with a subjective mood, objective possibility, she is passing her prime marriageable years, then the fiancé should go ahead and marry her. I mean, you've been betrothed for so long, then you break it off? The word hyperakamos, literally means beyond the peak of life, and so can be translated if she should be getting along in years. Paul adds that there is no sin in their getting married, of course. So, there's some notes on these. I love this expositors. They give you all kinds of specific notes, and they back up the interpretation. The Bible Knowledge Commentary on 36 to 40. Interpretation and translation of this passage is difficult, as the alternative marginal translation indicates. The issue revolves around whether the indefinite pronoun anyone refers to a father or to a prospective bridegroom. The NIV translators, following most modern commentators, have adopted the latter point of view, but have included the traditional interpretation in the margin. The strength of the bridegroom view lies in the fact that it permits a consistent subject for the verbs used throughout the passage, a strength which the NIV translators forfeited by making the virgin the subject of the phrase getting along in years. This decision was possibly prompted by the need to explain why the bridegroom might be thought to act improperly. His delay in consummating the marriage may, I think so, with her advancing age, adversely affecting her chance of ever getting married. The bridegroom view, however, faces some difficulty in the meaning of two verbs. In order to sustain the bridegroom view, it is necessary to understand the terms as virtual synonyms, meaning to marry. All right. I go along with the bridegroom view. This distinction, no big deal. Paul then gave advice to a father who, in the first century culture, exercised great decision-making authority in matters affecting his family, like the daughter marrying. He's probably almost the final say-so. A father may have decided that his daughter should not marry, possibly due to reasons similar to those Paul had mentioned in 1 Corinthians 7, 25 to 34. But in coming to this decision, the father had not reckoned with the fact that his daughter might not be able to remain single. She might not possess the gift of celibacy. If so, Paul recommended that the